Assalamu alaikum and good evening, everyone. My name is Miran Rahman. I'm the Chief Business Officer for Dun & Bradstreet, Pakistan. I have the pleasure to host this webinar with Mr. Bilal Gilani Sir, who is the Director, Country Head for Gallup Pakistan. Gallup Pakistan needs no introduction. They are leading polling service and leading data analytics and translation services in Pakistan. Dun & Bradstreet is a global data and analytics company, and this is a joint collaboration for Pakistan's Consumer Confidence Index. We are going to be discussing the results of this index for the second quarter of 2022. As you can see on your screen, this is a collaboration between DNB Pakistan and Gallup Pakistan. And the objective, to summarize before we start, is to measure the consumer sentiments of the Pakistani population, collected through a poll and translated through various benchmarks which we discussed. So Bilal, welcome to this webinar. This is not the first time we're talking about it, but always happy to talk to you again.
Ji, Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much for inviting and really looking forward to the webinar. Thank you.
Fantastic. So Bilal, as I mentioned, is the Executive Director at Gallup. Fantastic. You probably watch him on television and on the radio, where he is discussing the results of different polls which he conducts for politics and economics in Pakistan. I am the Chief Business Officer for Dun & Bradstreet, normally a treasury person, but have moved into data and analytics recently. And I thought this time we'd probably give a background of who both of us are and what our companies do. So Dun & Bradstreet, as I mentioned, the best way to explain it to our viewers is a data and analytics organization. We are the proud custodians of around today, the slide says 400, but today, in fact, just yesterday, we crossed 500 million plus commercial records, private and public companies. And DNB, the DNB Data Cloud is the custodian of 500 million plus records. And we leverage these records for a variety of services for our customers and our partners. This data is used for risk management services and risk consultancy services, third-party identification by verified data. We leverage our data for sales and marketing solutions in Pakistan and all over the world. We work very closely with the commercial banking system in Pakistan for third-party risk mitigation on companies anywhere in the world. In the South Asia, Middle East, we have a number of credit bureaus actually operating. We also use this data, leverage it, and distribute it via state-of-the-art technology, artificial intelligence and machine learning to all our customers. Some of our customers globally include Apple, which we have had a long-standing relationship with, Google, Amazon, Microsoft, Shell, Samsung are some of the names. Our largest client on the government side is the US government itself, which trusts us for third-party entity, corporate and public entity verification purposes. We are also consultants in the strategic space, branded as DNB Consulting. The idea is to spread verified company data in Pakistan and expose Pakistani companies in the DNB Data Cloud as verified entities, hence enhancing business in Pakistan, whether it's on the trade side or the strategic side, and eventually opening up Pakistan's economy. That's a little bit about us. Bilal, what is Gallup up to in Pakistan?
Thank you so much. So Gallup is Pakistan's oldest survey research and data analytics firm. We were set up in 1980. And since then, we've essentially set up many market research fields in Pakistan, including consumer research, as well as socio-economic third-party evaluations of projects, as well as we were the pioneers in media research and continue to provide reports that shed light on who's watching which TV, which particular media, why they watch it, how often they watch it, how is the media landscape changing. Essentially, we provide data analytics services to our clients who want to explore industries that they want to get into, who are also part of the industries but want to venture into different areas, want to explore other facets of that industry. And as well as we work with government and international organizations who want to help Pakistan. Where should the money go? Where the money would be best spent? That's the kind of data that we provide, so that decision making in the country happens under the light of the data rather than through people's prejudices or biases or preconceived notions. So data analytics firm trying to bring data and decision making based on data.
Fantastic. So we both are into similar things, just similar niches in the data and analytics space. And that's why the partnership works. And this partnership is specifically for the Consumer Confidence Index, and the results which we're going to discuss, as I mentioned earlier, is Q2 2022. Before we go into the findings, this data is about consumer sentiments in Pakistan and the different variables that shape consumer perception in Pakistan. So sentiment and perception are qualitative measures. Bilal and Bradstreet tried their best to measure these qualitative measures in a quantitative form through a poll. The Consumer Confidence Index, any CCI, anywhere in the world, it serves as a leading indicator for household consumption and saving, and is sometimes considered a key driver in overall economic activity, as consumption is directly correlated to growth in any economy. This quarterly publication is extremely important, as it is looked at by policymakers, it is looked at by key decision makers, it is looked at by businesses, and it gives an idea of a trend in the level of confidence the consumer has, whether it comes to future expenditures or future savings trends expected in the future, comparing them to past trends. So that's a little bit about what we're trying to accomplish with these results. Bilal, we've discussed this in a few webinars before, but the question keeps coming up again and again. So I'd like you to just address it again on how a sample in a population of 220 million is considered to be a valid benchmark for consumption when we look at the results. I'm sure we'll be asked this question again, so it's might as well address it now. Yeah.
Very, very true. So, I mean, it almost seems a magical thing when a sample of, say, 1,000, or in this particular survey's case, 1,543 individuals is able to predict what the 220 million Pakistanis think. So the science of survey research goes back into early 20th century, where as Dr. George Gallup was part of the pioneers of the survey research methodology, in which the idea is to pick up a random sample. So it is an absolutely random sample. Each one of the 220 million Pakistanis, 120 million adults, 330 million households have an equal chance of becoming part of our survey. So essentially a lottery. So if one was to pick up a random sample across Pakistan, then 1,500 individuals sample would be able to represent the 220 million. That's the science that has been replicated for almost a century across the world. The US electoral race survey is usually 750 individuals or 1,000 individuals. And in most of the cases, that particular sample has proven to predict the election before the elections by a margin of just 1% or even less most often. So similar, we bring to Pakistan in 1980 a same internationally tested methodology of picking up the sample, executing the tabulation, and bringing the results. And that's what we're doing for the Consumer Confidence Index survey, which in this case is about 1,543 individuals. It covers both males and females in exactly the same proportion as they are in Pakistan census. We have, in this particular sample, same proportion in terms of age groups as in Pakistan census. The urban and rural population, in this case, 65%, of the sample is from rural areas, 35% is from the urban areas, again, because that's how Pakistan is. All the Pakistan's provinces are represented in their equal share. And because we have all of these representations according to the census, therefore, the methodology is robust enough to predict what the consumer confidence is right now.
Right. And that's fantastically summarized. We've had discussions on this in detail, and if there are any further questions on the validity of the results in terms of how the data is collected, please reach out to us on LinkedIn or on the question and answer session, and we'll be happy to share more details and go into the mid-level depths of how our collection process takes place. If there's a 6.9% decline, Bilal, as you can see in our figures, just like any index, the CCI is measured on a benchmark of 100, as all indexes are. And this decline now, out of 100 is standing at 79.2 compared to 85.1 in Q1 2022. The last discussion that we had, we were also trying to pinpoint exactly why the confidence seems to be so high, because in the last quarter, we were discussing there was just a change in the government in the last quarter, and those results were being reflected in Q1. But this time in Q2, 6.9% decline quarter to quarter. Is that a significant number, over 5% when judging a comparison?
So I think it is a significant number, and it's also a number that is significant because it breaks the rather upward trajectory of in terms of consumer confidence that we were seeing. So if you were to look at the chart between quarter 3 to 2021 to quarter 1 2022, we saw at least for 3 quarters an upward swing in the overall number as well as the current confidence. So I think it's a significant decline, and it also brings the consumer confidence in the country to a level that is really low, even comparatively to our readings across the past many quarters since we started doing this activity. So if you see, most of the values are for the CCI are above 80. And the current reading now comes down to 79.2, which is a really low one. I also think that it's also important because there is a relative decline in the future confidence about the economy, about people's own economy as well. And it also breaks the cycle where despite everything, people had not lost hope. And I think this particular quarter also shows that not just people's current understanding of where the economy is and where their own economy is, there is a reasonable decline in their in the hope for how future would look like.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. Normally, we've seen, the average of the current sort of crop up the average of the future when we take the overall comparison. We've always, the current situation always in the past, if you see the results, the current measurement is always seems to be higher than the future measurement. But this time around, the difference, 95.6 and 62.7, as you mentioned, is a point of concern, which means that the differential, the pessimism seems to be this time on the higher side. Maybe we can take a look at that, but before we do that, could you explain to our viewers the term relative optimism? What exactly would that mean?
Yeah, so we've seen that generally Pakistani consumers are more pessimistic about their current situation and less pessimistic about their future's situation. So we wanted to essentially come up with an indicator that marks the gap between the two. The narrowing of the gap basically means that things are really improving, and therefore the current situation and what people think should be in the future essentially is also coming together. And the more the distance between the two, the higher the pessimism in that sense. So in this particular case, we see that the gap is essentially increasing and therefore, I mean, it's a sign that people are not just losing hope now; they're also losing hope in the future, um, and and something needs to be done in order to fix that. And it has also implications about future consumer spending that people may actually be doing, because we've seen that when people are generally optimistic about the future, they are less likely to curtail back their current spending. But if they're very pessimistic about future, that has an even higher impact on consumer spending, and they tend to hold back that consumer spending. So looking at not just the current but also the future makes sense, because it has an implication from a consumption perspective.
Okay, fantastic. So moving forward, just deep diving into this further. Percentage, this is more of a breakup between the current decrease and the future decrease, and you see the current decrease a lot higher than the future decrease. Is what we've touched on right now. The four different variables which we'll get into. I think it's important before we move in that we just explain the variables, which are household savings, inflation, and if we move household savings, unemployment, um, country's economic situation, and the financial situation. So I thought we probably should cover this before we sort of talk about this, because it'll give an exact idea to our viewers on what we are in to measure. And now that we've talked about these numbers, let's talk about the variables when you gather the data. And last quarter, we were talking about a change in government. But this quarter, we're talking about the biblical proportions and the disastrous floods, which seem to have a significant impact on the result.
That's correct. So I think this particular quarter's sort of key determinants or drivers for the consumer confidence are essentially the floods that happened, as well as very, very high, like the highest in Pakistan's documented history, inflation numbers. And again, some of that inflation numbers is actually explained by the floods themselves, but generally also differently as well. I think these two have worked both in real declining the purchasing power of the average consumer in the country, but also have had a huge psychological impact about what's going to happen. With floods, I think one of the drivers is that a large part of the country coming from rural areas, they actually get to see that their own business, which is the agriculture, is actually deeply affected, which basically means that in 6 months time period, if the agricultural produce may not be actually that high as compared to the previous year, and for many there would not be an agricultural produce. So in northern Sindh, where an area as big as the Czech Republic's in terms of area is underwater still, that means that the agricultural produce would not happen. So for consumers, I think we need to remember that at least 60% of the Pakistani population is still one or the other way dependent on agriculture. So when consumer confidence we're talking about those same people, and floods has had a huge impact on agricultural incomes and future agricultural income. I think the second largest is inflation, which is not just a Pakistani phenomena but a global phenomena, and a 28% inflation rate is just simply that we haven't encountered in Pakistan for many decades. So I think these two factors are really pulling down almost all the four indicators that you talked about.
Yeah, in the last talk which we had, we were talking about global supply chain disruptions and its impact on inflation, and the commodity super cycle which was kicking in, which affected our Q1 numbers and the inflationary impact. And those were showing in the results. That phenomena seems to be in a separate vertical than the phenomena which you were talking about which are these projected results, which are very much part of the floods which took place, and agriculture being an important part of the economy more than the manufacturing unit tends to realize. Before we move on, important to specifically identify what exactly does the 79.2 number mean. Under 75 is extremely pessimistic. 75 to 99 is pessimistic. When you're exactly at 100, when the C says that at 100 is neutral. 101, between 101 and 125 is optimistic. Anything above 125 is extremely optimistic. So the worrisome part is if you look at the standard parameters of measurement and the trend which is taking place and the future trend, which also seems to be on the decline as it was in the past. We are still very much in the pessimistic zone, but there is a threat that we move into an extremely pessimistic zone, especially when we start collecting data for this quarter and showing it next quarter. How much of a threat do you think that is? And are we very close to moving into the extremely pessimistic zone?
I think, unfortunately, I think in the previous quarter, we did have some sort of reasons to be very hopeful. Things seem to have reached a top, and there was a possibility that they would come down. I would think that the next quarter is going to be probably a climax of the problems in terms of what the consumer is going to face, and therefore is going to be. And I think that's kind of reflected in how the consumer is forecasting his own future household income and expenses. But I would hope that from quarter 3 onwards, the next quarter onwards, I think the things would start improving, and I think we need to be optimistic, but also be realistic, and the improvements that we get to see would not be very high, because we've seen that the consumer confidence it does not move very quickly between quarters. It's a long-term and a more glacial speed at which it moves. So we will be really looking into it deeply, and possibly exploring the drivers for the next report.
It's important to look at the history, Bilal. When we talk about the pessimistic zone in Q4 of 2021, the direction was out of the pessimistic zone and heading to the neutral zone. And that was because the government had sort of tried to instill confidence in economic growth, and COVID was over, and that was the justification behind the Q4 results moving out of the pessimistic zone. In Q1, despite the political instability, we were still heading in the direction which was out of the pessimistic zone, because there was a new government and people being hopeful were things that, after the storm sort of settles, the direction is heading towards neutral. But unfortunately, now that direction which we were in the last 3 quarters, two quarters here, but in the last 3 quarters, so that direction seems to have changed. And that's primarily because of Mother Nature and the natural disasters. So a lot of these questions were thrown at you, that the consumer confidence seems to be increasing in Pakistan. But the fact of the matter is that the qualitative representation was still in a zone which was very much in the red. I know this is a different repetition, but I thought that we'd bring it up because the trend has actually now reversed in the pessimistic zone.
That's great. I think a long-term view about the CCI measurements that we're doing is that until now, the CCI has actually not ever moved into the optimistic zone altogether. And I think if you look at the other indicators for the economy beyond the perception, the past 4 or 5 years, at least, and at least 5 to 6 years, almost all other indicators are also painting a similar picture. So we've had really, really poor GDP growth rates. We also had a stock market that's still not recovered to the level that it was in 2017, for example. I think, but with all of these, I think one can also hope that the worst is over, and for people who are looking at this number from their sales perspective or from their production perspective, I think the Pakistani potential is not certainly reflected in what's happening now, or what has happened in the past 6 years. There are good chances that once the consumer confidence revives, which I have every hope of, the kind of resources Pakistan has, and I mean how the young population is coming into the economy as well in the future, that the opportunity that Pakistan presents is still not reaped enough. And as soon as the consumer confidence revives, there should be a significant rise in demand for products and services. So we should plan for that particular event as well. As we look at the numbers from a pessimistic eye, there is also an opportunity there.
Sure. I mean, if I want to see anything positive out of this, it would possibly be that, yes, the future had crossed the 100 benchmark and the future was actually in the neutral zone or neutral to positive zone, and it's moved back in the negative zone, sure. But if you look at Q4, the future was 82.4 in the fourth quarter, and compared to the fourth quarter in Q2 of 2000, fourth quarter of 2021, the second quarter of 2022, the future index is still higher than it was in Q4. So there are a few positives which we can look at when we look at these numbers. I'll just move on and we'll talk about, we've given a summary of the takeaways of why we are very much in the pessimistic zone as of Q2. And it's primarily because there's pessimism on the current macroeconomic situation. And we can go into more depth in that. There is optimism regarding the future financial and economic situation. Unemployment is still very much an issue which is continuously highlighted. And this is very interesting, and I'd like to talk about it more in detail. A lot of people mentioned in the polls that the chances of the percentage level of savings in the household is going to increase. So let's start off with the macroeconomic situation. And the words which are used are extremely pessimistic about the macroeconomic situation.
That's correct. I think but from a consumer point of view, the macroeconomic situation is a mix of what they are experiencing, but also a mix of what they are exposed to. So we need to remember that the fieldwork happened in August, when things were really bad in terms of how the floods had actually affected a lot of population. There was very negative coverage of it. A lot of people were in dire need. A lot of people's family was in dire need. So people's sort of projection of all of those worries onto the macroeconomic situation is certainly at play. I think if I were to move on, I'd also want to talk about how people's perceptions are about unemployment. And I think it's a factor of not just the current economic situation that Pakistan is, that and unemployment is being generated. But it's also a short-term and a long-term problem. In the short term, what we've seen in our data is that a lot of employment has actually not come out of the COVID shock to employment that happened. So post-COVID recovery happened for many industries, but for many industries it did not. So they never got back to employing the same people again. We also saw that for a lot of industries, they for a long time they had not substituted labor with other sorts of capital, and the COVID provided an opportunity to substitute that. And unfortunately, those who were not skilled enough to go back into the same industry, they were laid off or not. So both I think the unemployment number essentially also shows a long-term fix that Pakistan needs to do, and
Yeah.
that's continuing to be something that's really dampening people's consumer. And I think if you talk about unemployment, it's also a lot of underemployment in Pakistan. So people actually being not fully utilized in terms of what they can do, and therefore very low wages coming their way. So it's a complex unemployment in that sense. It's a very complex issue, and it's the from that particular parameter. I think the any recovery or improvement in that would be a very long term phenomena rather than a short term one.
Okay, so that's, unemployment is a complex phenomenon in Pakistan. It's a very large population. I'm sure in the United States, when you work over there, unemployment and inflation are directly correlated. And, the unemployment number is a key number for the Federal Reserve to take their monetary policy decisions with the federal, when it comes to the federal fund rate. Over here, I suppose it's a bit qualitative. And when you want to sort of give an indirect message to regulators or policymakers, or even, the public sector or NGOs for that matter, to measure this, I'm very happy that you mentioned, that underemployment is a difficult measurement, but its qualitative sentiment is probably something which maybe not measured, but can be judged through the poll benchmark. And that should be, that's important for policymakers to know about. Bilal, when we say that the perception or the sentiment for savings to increase sharply in the future in this situation, what would that exactly mean? Just for our viewers, because with the inflation number increasing, is it a percentage of inflation of the household income because they want to save for a rainy day, or is it the fact that they are not willing to consume because inflation is so high, and we're not going into the non-essential sector, of course?
Yes, I think so. Because there is pessimism about the future economic confidence in the country, what the consumer is saying is that they are going to withhold their current consumption even more and save in the future because they feel that the future is going to be even more difficult than the current time. So that's the link that I was talking about. That the because people are going to be saving more, their current expenditure is going to go down, but also their expenditure in the future may also go down because they are so worried and anxious about the coming times.
Okay, so they're anxious, and that is the why. That is where rainy days are expected. No pun intended, for next year and the times after that. Interesting. Let's move forward now. So those are the 4 key takeaways that Gallup and Bradstreet identified.
Yes, and I would think that maybe from a producer's point of view or from a company's point of view, I think what the numbers do paint and they continue to paint is to come up with some value propositions because the consumers have money, but they have very limited money, and also they're anxious about the future, so they want to hold on to the money that they have. So any value propositions that we can come up with, those would be the ones that would really help drive the consumer towards them. So savings and budgets and those sort of products and services are going to be much more successful than like slightly more value-added ones.
Absolutely. Coming back to the 4 elements: unemployment, household savings, macroeconomics, and the situation within the house. Let's start off with within. आपका घर मेरा घर, और इसको 2.5% का डिक्लाइन आया है क्वार्टर टू क्वार्टर हाउसहोल्ड की फाइनेंशियल सिचुएशन। इसमें बिलाल मुझे लग रहा है कि फ्यूचर में तो हमें कोई खास चेंज नजर नहीं आया, जो इम्पैक्ट जो नजर आया अगर हम फ्यूचर आउटलुक कंपेयर करें प्रीवियस में, लेकिन सबसे बड़ा चेंज इसमें करंट में आया है, और इसकी कोई खास वजह है कि इतना बड़ा 5.8% का जंप इतना बड़ा आ गया है, जब एक स्पेसिफिक हाउस होल्ड की बजट के ऊपर अगर हम बात करें?
I would think कि इस पर्टिकुलर इंडिकेटर पे जो मैग्नीट्यूड है 5.8% का, वो शायद बहुत सिग्निफिकेंट नहीं है चेंज इन द इन द इंडिकेटर्स वैल्यू. I think what's really as long as it remains within the 75 to 100 value that we looked into, तो ये एक almost similarly pessimistic है, is only a small rise and a small decline in till that point. So I think the main finding here is that it's declining, and it's also still pessimistic and continues to be pessimistic as it was previously, and it's become slightly more pessimistic.
अगर इस पूरी स्लाइड को अगर जल्दी से अगर पहली नजर डालें तो सबसे बड़ा नंबर आपको 22.5% नजर आता है, 22.5%, और वो अनएम्प्लॉयमेंट है जिसके ऊपर हम पहले गुफ्तगू करेंगे, और बहुत फर्क है. क्वालिटेटिवली हमने समझाने की कोशिश की कि अनएम्प्लॉयमेंट अभी इस पोल में और इस बेंचमार्क में पाकिस्तान का सबसे बड़ा फिक्रमंद मसला है, और यही मसला है जो कंजम्पशन के पैटर्न्स को सबसे ज्यादा इम्पैक्ट कर रहा है. और उसमें वो फर्क आपको नजर आ रहा है जो बेंचमार्क अभी 6% आपने अभी बोला हाउस होल्ड फाइनेंस सिचुएशन के लिए, इतना बड़ा डिक्लाइन नहीं है जितना हो सकता था. डबल डिजिट्स में कंट्री की इकोनॉमिक सिचुएशन आ रही है, उसके ऊपर भी डिस्कस करेंगे. सेविंग्स का जो इम्पैक्ट है वो भी 5% से नीचे है, लेकिन 22 का 5% का फर्क एक क्वार्टर में इतना बड़ा जंप कैसे आ सकता है in terms of the jobs available for the people that we live.
I think one purpose of the consumer confidence report that we produce is to shed light on the parts of the economy as part of the society that gets hidden away from the main headlines in the country. तो कभी कभार मेन हेडलाइंस इन द कंट्री जो है वो शहर की इकोनॉमी की बात करते हैं. कभी कभार हेडलाइंस जो हैं वो एक्सपोर्ट वर्सेस लोकल जो मैट्रिक्स है पाकिस्तान की, इवन मैन्युफैक्चरिंग में, उसमें वो एक्सपोर्ट इंडस्ट्री जो है वो ज़्यादा एक प्रोमिनेंट पोजीशन ले लेती है. So I would think that this unemployment number is actually showing कि एक जो हमारी आंखों से ओझल जो एक पाकिस्तान है, जो कि वो पाकिस्तान है कि जिसमें बहुत मेजर फ्लड्स आए, वो पाकिस्तान है जिसमें लोग बहुत अरसा और आज भी यानी बेसिक जो ह्यूमन नीड्स हैं, मतलब खाने की और शेल्टर की नीड से, तो जो नंबर्स थे वो 35 मिलियन पाकिस्तानीज इफेक्ट हुए थे फ्लड से. तो जब आपका घर जो है वो अगर पानी के नीचे है और आपके सामने जो आपकी ज़मीन है वो पानी के नीचे है, और आपकी शॉप और आपकी फैक्ट्री जो है वो पानी से मुतासर हो चुकी है, या आप द सेकंड लार्जेस्ट मैन्युफैक्चरिंग इन पाकिस्तान हैपेंस इज इन द फूड प्रोसेसिंग इंडस्ट्री. So जो forecasts हैं, और textile is the largest, so both for the textile and for the food manufacturing, the forecasts are very bad because जो agricultural produce है वो इतनी majorly affect हुई है, और दुनिया भर से supply chains क्योंकि already disrupted हैं और बहुत expensive हैं. So I would think that this unemployment number is actually showing that people have actually been started to be laid off by the industries, by their employers, because they don't see the demand in the future and therefore they're starting to lay off. और ये चीज जो है वो इस हमारी इस रिपोर्ट का एक ऑडियंस गवर्नमेंट भी है, पॉलिसी मेकर्स भी हैं, एज वेल एज
मेरा इसमें ये मेरे लिए सरप्राइजिंग था, क्योंकि देखें इन नंबर्स में इन्फ्लेशन का भी हमें नजर आ रहा है, कोई डायरेक्ट मेजरमेंट नजर आ रही है कि फाइनेंशियल सिचुएशन, घर की फाइनेंशियल सिचुएशन, वो पाकिस्तान के महंगाई के जो नंबर्स हैं जो 20% से कभी कभार 25% से ऊपर जा रहे हैं, पिछले क्वार्टर में 30% से भी ऊपर थे. हाउस होल्ड सेविंग्स का भी इन्फ्लेशन इम्पैक्ट आ रहा है. लेकिन अगर हम कह रहे हैं कि जी सबसे बड़ा मसला पाकिस्तान में अनएम्प्लॉयमेंट है, लैक ऑफ जॉब्स हैं, तो पाकिस्तान में फिर सबसे बड़ा महंगाई एक बड़ा मसला है. लेकिन क्या हम इन नंबर्स को दिखा के क्या हम ये कह रहे हैं कि पाकिस्तान में असल मसला सो सबसे बड़ा मसला है जो टॉप ऑफ द लिस्ट है वो अनएम्प्लॉयमेंट है, और उसके बाद फिर महंगाई आती है।
जी, बिल्कुल। I think this is a good analysis of what really, I mean, what's really behind the headlines, what really matters, because uh, अगर आप एम्प्लॉयड हैं और आप वैल्यू एडेड एम्प्लॉई हैं, तो आपके ऊपर इन्फ्लेशनरी इम्पैक्ट जो है वो फेयरली लिमिटेड है। मगर अगर आपके पास एम्प्लॉयमेंट नहीं है तो इससे भी क्वार्टर की भी इन्फ्लेशन हो तो यू आर इन डीप ट्रबल। या अगर आप अंडर एम्प्लॉयड हैं और इससे भी कम इन्फ्लेशन होती है तो तब भी आपके लिए। सो एट द कोर इज अ प्रॉब्लम ऑफ पीपल बीइंग आइदर नॉट एम्प्लॉयड or being underemployed in industries that don't really pay them back. And I think इस आपके इस प्रोग्राम के थ्रू आई थिंक हम एक चीज जो पॉइंट आउट कर सकते हैं वो ये भी है कि जो इवन सिटी इकोनॉमी है या अर्बन इकोनॉमी है उसमें जो यंग लोग हैं उनकी एम्प्लॉयमेंट का जो मेजर एक क्राइसिस है। So in a recent report that we did, a quarter of undergraduate educated Pakistani men and women, they are unemployed. So undergraduate की डिग्री रखते हैं, जॉब ढूंढने के ख्वाहिशमंद हैं, मगर उनमें से एक चौथाई जो है वो आज भी एम्प्लॉयमेंट नहीं रखते। इसके मुकाबले में अगर आपने मास्टर मैट्रिक किया हुआ है तो अनएम्प्लॉयमेंट रेट जो है वो 10% का है। सो when we कि हम एम्प्लॉयमेंट के ऊपर बात करें and how this is a very salient issue, there is a huge crisis of employed unemployment, educated unemployed people even in the city economy. या फिर अगर एम्प्लॉयड हैं so almost 50% of the people who are employed they say that जो तालीम उन्होंने हासिल की जॉब वो
उसका फायदा नहीं,
उसकी मुताबिकत से नहीं कर रहे। तो एमबीए किया है मगर सेक्रेटरी की जॉब कर रहे हैं या हॉस्पिटल में काम करते हैं मगर पढ़ाई किसी और चीज़ की है। सो आई थिंक ये जैसे अनएम्प्लॉयमेंट इज सच अ ह्यूज इशू एंड इट्स समथिंग दैट्स रियली ड्राइविंग द सीसीआई। सो उसके ड्राइवर्स आई थिंक अगेन कॉम्प्लेक्स हैं बट अनफॉर्चुनेटली वी नॉट पेइंग इनफ हीट टू इट। और ये चीज वो है कि जो प्रोड्यूसर या एम्प्लॉयर भी रेज करता है।
जी जी, बात पिछले साइड में डिस्कस कर रहे थे, इसकी मेजरमेंट पाकिस्तान में बहुत कॉम्प्लेक्स है और इसको डिफाइन करना भी पाकिस्तान में तो बहुत कॉम्प्लेक्स है। कभी इन्फ्लेशन को तो डिफाइन करना तो स्टेट बैंक ऑफ पाकिस्तान का अपना कंज्यूमर प्राइस इंडेक्स का बेंचमार्क है, वो उसका जब बेस चेंज होता है तो साथ साथ नंबर भी चेंज होता है और उसको मार्केट ग्लोबली एक्सेप्ट कर ले, ग्लोबली भी एक्सेप्ट होता है वो आईएमएफ के टर्म्स पे, और वो इंटरनली भी हमारे एनालिस्ट उस नंबर को एक्सेप्ट कर लेते हैं, whether that index is the true reflection or not, but there is no index one, and it's a key part of policy making, and according to us it's the number one issue right now, as you just mentioned.
Because so the unfortunately labor force survey is the only instrument through which unemployment is measured, and that is measured every 2 years. So between the 2 years, जैसे अभी बिल्कुल एक मेजर क्राइसिस टाइम है फ्लड्स का, इससे पहले कोविड का, तो इस तरह की मेजरमेंट मौजूद नहीं थी। एंड आई थिंक दैट्स वन indicator that the CCI by providing these numbers is actually filling into that policy information gap. So I think this is an important indicator that everyone needs to look into.
Absolutely. Emerging economies or developed economies, they दोनों जो Federal Reserve की जो judgment आती है, unemployment again is on the top when decisions made. As important as inflation. हमारे मुल्क में तो inflation के ऊपर decisions ली जाती हैं, both on the monetary and the fiscal side. But दूसरे ममालिक में तो दोनों variables. We can talk about this a lot. I know it's very close to your heart. I think थोड़ा सा आगे चलते हैं क्योंकि और भी बहुत बातें अभी रहती हैं। हाउस होल्ड सिचुएशन की जो 6 मंथ कंपैरिजन है उसमें आपको कोई ऐसी आउटस्टैंडिंग चीज नजर आ रही है? इफ वी कंपेयर द करंट टू द फ्यूचर, बिसाइड्स ऑफ कोर्स ड्रॉप इन नंबर्स जो हमारे स्क्रीन पे नजर आ रहा है, देयर हैज बीन अ ड्रॉप इन नंबर्स बट द गैप्स रिमेन द सेम प्रीटी मच।
That's correct. I think this is a long, I mean, at least a 6 month to 9 month story that household economics in Pakistan is like really, really affected, and people are still looking for an upside to happen somewhere. And so it's a
Yeah.
continuing bad story here.
It's a marginal decline, and let's hope that if it's going to decline, it declines at levels which are acceptable in that pessimistic range. Macroeconomics पे अभी तक हमने touch base नहीं किया. I know unemployment is a macroeconomic issue, and I think we've highlighted that pretty much. But if you look at the overall balance of payments in terms of our current account deficit, that has dropped significantly since the last time we spoke in Q1. There was an inflated current account deficit, not anymore. That's below 1 billion. But Pakistan has paid the price in terms for consumption, because हमारी consumption को cut करके ही वो हमारा जो CAD है वो arrest हुआ है, and there was arrest in our imports, and rightfully so at that stage, because our current account deficit was ballooning. But the macroeconomic situation, if you look at the account keeping, the bookkeeping, it shows the exports are pretty much saturated. But because of that decline in import bill, oil prices are now normal, but over $100 a barrel when the last time we spoke. That was playing a huge role in the import bill as well, over 30%, and that was a big issue. Oil is still expensive for Pakistan standards, hovering around between 85 and $90 a barrel. But that import, for bookkeeping purposes, that import was curtailed through both fiscal measures, regulatory measures, and directives. But do you think the consumer, जिसकी हम अभी sentiments measure कर रहे हैं, has paid the price for that in terms of standard of living?
जी, बिल्कुल. I think the consumer has been affected because हमने बहुत सी products जो हैं वो बेचने की इजाजत खत्म कर दी है, and some of those products were actually helping them sort of mitigate the inflationary trends in the country, as well as the fact that I think the macroeconomic story जो है उसमें imports को curtail करने से हमने शुरू में तो हमने फायदा देखा है, मगर अब हमें नजर आ रहा है कि exports भी curtail हो गई हैं, because imports अगर expensive होंगी या imports अगर ban हो जाएंगी, हमने CAT को control करने के लिए दोनों चीजें की, तो जो exporters है उनके पास raw material कैसे आएगा? I would think that this is just a very temporary respite that we have gotten. उस respite से कुछ ये कि हमारा जो
in terms of production and growth is a fair point, but do you think आपके experience के वाले collecting the data के standard of living पे impact आया है इस import के arrest का? Have people been asked to sacrifice? Because essentials तो very much are still available, right? ज़्यादातर जो आपके जो retirements जो रुकी हैं, जो settlements जो रुकी हैं, they've been on non-essentials if you take a look at the list. And it does create a negative sentiment when you want to go and consume and spend in an economy where not everything might be able readily. For example, building a new building, उसमें आपको कुछ materials पे compromise तो करना पड़ेगा.
I think इसमें again जो एक different segments of the economy है. So I mean a huge driver for consumer spending is the relatively upscale sector in the economy. The urban economy, those linked with exports, and those living in metropolitan cities. I think those consumers have really paid a price by their restriction in the choices that are available to them and increased price that they have had to pay because supply constraints हैं. From a larger consumer point of view, I think ये जो regulatory measures हैं, इनकी वजह से I think जो exchange rate है उसकी क्योंकि fluctuation कुछ कम हुई है, और डॉलर रूपी जो benchmarking है उसमें रूपी जो है वो relatively stronger हुआ है, उससे कुछ inflation को एडजस्ट
हम्म।
करने में कुछ मदद मौजूद हुई है?
Absolutely, वो the main
टाइम
the main objective the main objective for that was to bring the CAD under control, और जब CAD कंट्रोल में आएगा तो तब ही हमारे रुपए पे थोड़ा सा में थोड़ी सी स्टेबिलिटी आएगी.
और उसके थ्रू
So
इन्फ्लेशन जो है, जो इम्पोर्टेड
वो
प्रोडक्ट है, I think at the end of the day we sometimes forget that unfortunately पाकिस्तान में हर इंसान जो है वो किसी न किसी फॉर्म में इम्पोर्टेड प्रोडक्ट यूज करता है. तो मेरे और आपके
ये
घर में दाल पकती है, दाल जो है पाकिस्तान इंपोर्ट करता है, which पाकिस्तान
रोज
should not be doing because हम एक एग्रीकल्चरल कंट्री हैं. दाल जो है वो relatively arid environment में भी उग सकती है. हम चाय बाहर से इंपोर्ट करते हैं. इट्स नॉट अ वेरी लार्ज अमाउंट, 500 million, but every Pakistani is one or the other way using an imported product. And if we are able to stabilize the rupee dollar
yeah,
parity, we are able to arrest inflation to that extent.
that's actually the reason why I brought up the decline in the import bill with consumption, because I I know कि non-essential imports पे एक certain income bracket पे ही उसका impact ज्यादा पड़ता है. लेकिन जैसे आपने भी कहा, हर घर में डिस्पाइट द इनकम ब्रैकेट कोई ना कोई इंपोर्टेड चीजें हर घर में पड़ी, और उसके ऊपर आई थिंक the CAD, let's see where it goes. We have a lot more to discuss. लेकिन लग नहीं रहा कि अभी कोई रिस्ट्रिक्शन अभी फिलहाल खुलने लगी है इस पे, to be quite honest. Unemployment, sir, ये जो gap, this is just deep diving into it. The huge decline. 55% of the respondents highlighted that unemployment will increase in the next 6 months. So this is going into the data. 55% respondents highlighted that unemployment will increase in the next 6 months.
That's correct. I think again, जो हम यही story paint कर रहे हैं कि I think inflation is an issue, but unemployment is also increasingly a huge, a bigger issue for people. And
तो
उसके बारे में pessimism
इसको तो मैं extremely pessimistic zone में ही लेके जा रहा हूँ फिलहाल. It's only 0.7% away. That's
correct. जी.
So
बिल्कुल. और आई थिंक इट्स ऑल्सो समटाइम्स कुछ चीजें हैं जो गवर्नमेंट को सोचने की हैं, कुछ हैं जो प्राइवेट सेक्टर को भी सोचने की हैं, क्योंकि एट द एंड ऑफ द डे if the consumer does not have enough money, it's a worry for all of us who are also trying to woo the consumer towards our side. So I would think that these
sorry, मैं माफी चाहता हूँ, वो मैंने स्लाइड गलती से चेंज कर दी थी. ये 58.2% आ रहा है
जी.
ये
still a little away, but it's quite near that really the lowest benchmark possible.
ये तो अंडर 75 है ही है बिल्कुल.
जी बिल्कुल.
So
if it exactly, so I think as even the private sector needs to think कि हम क्या कर सकते हैं इकोनॉमी के लिए, क्योंकि अगर इकोनॉमी इसी तरह से डिक्लाइन करती रही तो उनकी कंज्यूमर स्पेंडिंग जो है, जो कि हम और आप कोशिश कर रहे हैं बढ़ाने की या अपनी तरफ वो करने की, वो भी नहीं हो पाएगी. So I would think that this entire, unfortunately, the report paints a bleaker picture, but it also helps us think about where and what should be done, both from the government side and from the private side.
Yeah, where and what is the key? Which issues to address? Which is the largest issue? Which is the smallest? And what are the differentiations and the level of importance of which issues we're talking about is what we're trying to do. And then only then can they progress towards policy. We've discussed this as well. Let's change it. Let's talk about the demographics now, the geographies, and go province to province on the overall index and how it showed. The largest number which I see on our screens is 35.4%. 41.4% current in Balochistan, and a 35.4% overall change in Balochistan. I'm not sure if I recall, but has Balochistan always had the highest percentage change on the declining side?
Not so the increase and decrease varies across provinces in different reports, and their magnitude as well. Sometimes one province has higher and the other has lower. Below the national level, I think the local perceptions and situations and politics also has an impact on how things are moving. I would think that some of that is at play in Balochistan, where the numbers are painting in a different direction, and there's been an increase um, uh, by these proportions. But it's something to investigate more what those local conditions and situations were that made them more optimistic about where things are. And I think the numbers still for even for Balochistan, the numbers were starting off from a very low base, so all the numbers still remain under 100. So
is there any specific
overall,
reason coming to mind that Balochistan is so optimistic? कुछ जब डेटा आप कलेक्ट कर रहे थे प्रोविंस से?
I think I need to look into this, what particular but local stories that may have been.
क्योंकि KPK में तो समझ आ रहा है. That is obviously right. That's obviously because of the popularity which the KPK government has. Sindh may there's a decline, a significant one in the future of 26.3%. From 105.5 is back to 77.7. And I think this is definitely because of the floods. Because Sindh में जो तबाही आई है, वो फ्यूचर भी आउटलुक भी ठीक लग रहा है और ये जो करंट आउटलुक है वो भी तो जो फ्लड का इम्पैक्ट है वो ये पंजाब के करंट में शायद हमें 8% का नजर आ रहा हो इधर और यहाँ पे सिंध का जो करंट और फ्यूचर जो आउटलुक है इधर भी हमें डेफिनेटली ये फ्लड का इम्पैक्ट Anything else which we might have missed when looking at this?
जो floods का impact है वो यहाँ काफी clearly वाज़ेह है कि सबसे ज़्यादा सिंध affected है और to some extent the lowest is Punjab, which is how the floods have affected as well, and KPK as well, ये जहाँ पर effect नजर आ रहा है. So I think the floods is at the provincial level the adverse event that really is playing is the floods itself.
Right. A little bit on some other segmentations, urban and rural, which is interesting. What does the N stand for, Bilal? Is this the survey? The one which
the sample size. The sample size.
This is the sample size, right? This is the sample size. So larger sample size. Let's talk about the rural sample size. What are the, because the challenge is collecting from these areas. The rurals both are on the decline, to be quite honest. And the very surprising part, Bilal, is that the numbers are not that different.
Exactly.
Again, overall, 11.2% current situation, 9.1% rural situation, or 6.5% rural future में ज़्यादा peak है compared to the urban.
That's correct.
The light of the end of the tunnel is dimmer in the rural areas.
That's correct. Slightly poverty rates भी वहाँ ज़्यादा हैं, जो income भी slightly जो disposable income है वो lower होती है. So I think they're feeling the inflation more, and I think the rural economy has been affected a little bit more in terms of the floods and. But I think the general numbers are very similar.
They're the same because even अगर हम overall index देखें 78.3 की measurement rural की है और 80.7 की measurement urban की है. Literally less than 2 basis points का या 2 points का फर्क है.
बिल्कुल ये एक I think जो urban and rural economy पाकिस्तान की है, इसके ऊपर भी एक तरह से misconception सी पाई जाती है कि they are very, very different from each other. Or some people think the rural economy is not that big, and the urban is really big. उसमें कोई qualitative difference रह गया है. So I think one of our readings from the previous 10 years of research is that the rural is very much catching up to the urban, and the rural and the urban economy are also getting very interlinked with each other. So जो rural में effects हैं एग्रीकल्चर के और किसी वजह से वो एकदम से अर्बन में शिफ्ट हो जाते हैं, and very similarly from urban to rural. So in that sense an interlinking between the urban and the rural economy is happening, which also translates into how the urban consumer and the rural consumer also feeling similar heats as well as hopefully that would come their way.
Right. Interesting. Now coming back to the ladai, male or female. We've had a male or female, the real conflict Now we haven't discussed it in this webinar, but in the previous webinar we've talked about the role of the female being the household decision maker and the budget provider being the CFO of the house, yeah, being the finance minister of the house, and this being a trend in Pakistan where the decisions are made by the female in most houses, and because of that, they also have a very close eye on the inflationary pressure and the impact it is having on the household and the projections of savings that they are expected to do in the future, and the fact that they're also responsible to make sure that every buck is well spent in the household. Yet this is got nothing to do with rural or urban. This is just the way the Pakistan household is managed. Correct me if I'm wrong, अगर मैंने कोई गलत बात की हो, but this is what we discussed.
That's very true. I think women are much better at budget keeping and much more better with the money than men. I mean, men tend to think that they are, but they're actually not. So women are actually doing much better. We sometimes compare how budgets are handled by households who say that men are in control, and in households where females are in control. And the female-controlled households are far more able to save better with the same amount of money. But that puts the women in a very difficult position when it comes to a very high inflationary pressure, as we're seeing now, because they have to somehow manage within that same amount of money.
With the same amount of money. And it's a huge role. The CFO's life is getting tougher in every household.
That's certainly happening, yes.
And budgeting is now a bigger challenge than it ever was before. And the avenues remain the same in terms of saving. उसमें तो कोई change हमें आया नजर नहीं आया in terms of the interest. मसला फिलहाल ये आ रहा है कि हमारे जो मर्द हजरात हैं इस मुल्क में ये फ्यूचर के लिए थोड़े से पॉजिटिव हैं, अभी भी हैं Q2 में, और इनका जो नंबर है वो ज्यादा चेंज नहीं आया, 86 से 83 गया है. So they're a bit more pessimistic than they were in Q1, but they're pretty much the same. The pessimism is in the minds of the female who has pulled the results, right? 80 अब Q1 में 86 और 84 में ज्यादा फर्क नहीं है इंडेक्स के बेंचमार्क में, लेकिन इस क्वार्टर में फर्क है. इस क्वार्टर में 83 मेल की मार्किंग की मेजरमेंट है और 75 पाकिस्तान की फीमेल्स. The females are more pessimistic this time.
I think it's also, I would interpret that, I mean, men are overconfident perhaps about the future, and females, because they're so close to where the heat is in terms of managing the household consumption in this high inflation times. तो टमाटर का और जो है आलू का भाव जो है वो उनको डेली बेसिस पे फेस करना पड़ रहा है, एंड देयरफॉर उनके लिहाज से तो चीज़ें ख़राब हो रही हैं और आने वाला वक्त और भी मुश्किल है. मर्द हज़रात हो सकता है कि बिकॉज दे नो अ लिटिल away from the heat, they continue, but the numbers are, I mean, I would think that these are not very high numbers, so ऐसा नहीं है कि
absolutely. Also men, sometimes men have no choice but to be positive. That's also and the reality, the sad reality is sometimes hit by the CFO, and the CEO sometimes does not have a choice to be positive. Although there are two CEOs, I will correct myself, there are two CEOs in each house.
That's very true.
Yeah, so but there is a difference this time, the females seem to be a bit more pessimistic than the males. थोड़ा सा एज पे भी नजर डाल देते हैं. 30 to 49 seems to have the highest decline. Below 30 maybe decline है, which is very similar. हमारे जो 50 साल से ऊपर जो हजरात हैं, जो शहरी हैं, उनमें ज्यादा फर्क नहीं आया in the level of pessimism, और उनका स्कोर भी relatively higher है between 30 and 49. So हमारी जो elderly generation है, this seems to be, if you look at the score alone, the elderly generation and the generation below 30 seems to be scoring the same, but the overall percentage under 30 has had a bigger impact on the downward side.
So I think I would interpret that this is usually the case in other quarters as well. That the elderly seems, because they've seen so many ups and downs in the economy, so they tend to have a slightly more patient attitude towards what's really happening. So जो fluctuation है वो कम महसूस होती है उनको. They think that things would pass off. I think it's also that जो challenges to or जो needs हैं वो थोड़ी सी change हो जाती हैं. So I think the most anxious group in this is the 30 to 49, who seems to have the highest demands over the budget that they actually are able to. So this time period may more kids are in school. There are more people who are feeding than people who are earning. 50 plus may there usually there's someone who's also about to join earning the income as well from the same household. और कुछ expenditures कम होना शुरू हो जाते हैं आपके. I think the young people, obviously, I mean, I would think that they are yet to really face the music, and therefore they tend to be a little more optimistic about things. And I think that's a good thing that they are not as pessimistic. Otherwise, opportunities कैसे उनको मिलेंगी. So my take would be that this is in line with like a general trend.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's about it, Bilal. If you would like to see the entire study and the entire report in detail, it is a huge publication that was just released today. And it has got, on the more important question is what economists and regulators ask us is how the data collected, what's the quality of the data, etc., etc. There is an entire section in the report which covers that. This report is, you can download it on Dun & Bradstreet's LinkedIn page or Gallup's LinkedIn page, either one. It is readily available to read. If you have any questions with respect to what we have discussed today, please reach us out on LinkedIn, join Gallup and Dun & Bradstreet LinkedIn page. You can leave your questions there. I will show Bilal will get back to you. I will not, or I will also try to get back to you on any questions that you may have. Everything is in the report. If you need solutions for sales and marketing purposes or third-party risk mitigation, or would like to work with Dun & Bradstreet in some form or the other, we serve from the smallest to the smallest companies to the largest of companies in Pakistan, including financial institutions. If you would like to discuss how we can move forward for a possible partnership, please don't hesitate to reach out to me at sales@bcn.com. Bilal, any contact details that you would like to leave for yourself before we?
Thank you so much. And I'd also look forward to any feedback or any ways that we can improve the report, any ways that we can improve these sessions that we do. Please don't hesitate to reach out. We'd be very happy to adapt ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Bilal, for coming and taking out the time. And see you in the next publication.
Thank you.
And always a pleasure and very, very interesting to talk to you.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you for watching, everyone. Allah Hafiz. Have a great weekend. Alaikum salam. Have a great weekend. Allah Hafiz.